Well, welcome to Still Another Test Review podcast. I don't know if you had a chance to listen to my podcast on attribution essays in class. If you didn't, I strongly recommend that you listen to it as part of studying for this exam. Basically, I give away all the answers, but you will not be able to use note cards on the test, so you have to stick the information in your mental hard drives. So let's look at this attribution question and take it apart briefly. You should have the identification drill down by now. In some ways, the attribution questions are easier. Because the College Board doesn't give you any of the answers within the question, and you need just 2 of 4 identification elements. Note that you don't get penalized for wrong identifications as long as you have the required 2. So I strongly recommend that you write down something for all 4, even if you aren't sure about some of them. Basically, there's no penalty for guessing. And you will get an attribution question about 1 of these 4 works. I have all 4 set up as random questions on Moodle, so it really means that the evil Moodle elves will decide which work you get. The good news is that I talk about all of these on my attribution podcast, and you may notice I'm not including the Nkisi and Kondi, even though I did talk about it in the attribution podcast. You already had an opportunity to write about that very interesting work. Here's the rest of the question. Formal characteristics, as I think you know by now, mean what it looks like. It's visual evidence. Remember, you'll have a photo of the work to look at. Use it. And also remember that you're not penalized for wrong answers. So it is really smart to list 3 or 4 formal similarities, just to cover your backs, using a polite word there. Content means what the work is about. Who are the figures? What stories do they tell? You only need 1 content element, but give the grader at least 2, right? Context means how the work is used, and infer simply means that you should assume it is used in the same way as the required work. You only need to give 1 piece of contextual evidence. That is, you only need to discuss 1 way that this work was used or the role it plays in that culture. But altogether now, give your grader at least 2 pieces of contextual information. Play it safe. And here's the scoring guidelines, which basically is a chart that says what I just told you. Well, I think the Africa and Pacific review questions are hard. I did not write any of these questions. I borrowed them from a variety of sources. I don't like some of these questions, but I probably won't like some of the questions on your AP exam either. Frankly, you need to practice answering questions that I also think are unclear or maybe even unfair. But the good news is that all of these questions are up on Moodle, and you can take the review quizzes as many times as you want. But please, do also take the time to read the answer explanations. It will not only help you keep the correct answers in your head, it will also give you insights into how to think about these works. On to some other questions. What are emblemasks? How are they used? What are their formal qualities? Note I go over this in my attribution review as well. How do these attributes support their function? Note, you will not get this image on the test, so you have to have it in your mind. Who carved this? Hint, it was a cooperative effort. Why are nails and other materials added to the sculpture? There are 2 very similar questions about this process, by the way, which indicates I got it from 2 different sources, and it's probably an important question. What is the most common context for using this kind of figure? When does the need for it arise? Here's a hint for another question about this work. The figures help the culture address issues of power, danger, and disease, but not, as it happens, love and marriage. This is an African work, but we encountered it in our previous units. You may need to go back and review. What are these called? Where are they facing? What do these images probably represent? Which of the following is true? The sculptures were clothed during ceremonies, attacked as enemy spirits, painted in bright colors, or organized into groupings. I think the photo gives you that answer. Why was basalt used to construct Nam-Medol, aside from the fact that it was found on volcanic islands? Hint, it has to do with how this kind of basalt, known as columnar basalt, forms geologically, and I talk about this in my introductory podcast. What is the prehistoric Pacific work? Which of these works from this unit also use animal motifs? What social and political purpose did this complex serve? Think back to my first podcast where I talked about how Pacific art reflected and reinforced social structure and status. What purpose did the walls serve? Remember that this complex was basically built on an artificial island atop a coral reef. What was the function of this work? What did the shell stand for? Was it painted? Was it actually used at sea? There are a lot of questions about this work, and notice it's also showed up on a College Board long essay question, which you've already tackled. I recommend that you review it thoroughly. So, what signal did the material and manufacturing progress of the Hawaiian ahu'ula send to anyone who saw one or saw someone wearing one? Who got to wear them? How would people who saw someone wearing such a cloak respond? What do the patterns on the cape represent? Hint, since I find this actual College Board question a little confusing, the artist does not own these works and the wearer does not get to select the pattern. What purpose did these capes serve in the society? Hint, this was about power and social standing, not about wealth. By appearing in the guise of gods, Hawaiian chiefs would have sought to intimidate their enemies. What is the function of this work? By the way, there are two questions that ask pretty much the same thing from two different College Board publications. Think maybe the ECB wizards think this is important, or maybe that it's easy to turn into a question. By the way, one of the questions does not come with an image or the English title. What is the function of this work? Do you notice a pattern here? The College Board questions, the ones I actually get from College Board publications, are very focused on function and content in this unit. In this case, think past the title of the object to the function it serves for the people of this culture, still serves to this day. What is the function of this Fang Bieri? What elements of Fang life account for producing and using works such as these? What were the functions of the Great Zimbabwe Complex? This is an accept question, so I'm going to give you a big hint. Is there any evidence that the walls or buildings were used for military purposes? You will need to recall for another question that this is made of ashlar masonry, that is, stones that are not held together by mortar. So how well do you think that kind of a wall would hold up if attacked in battle? What would most strike a visitor about this complex? I don't really like this question, but the answer reflects what makes this complex so unusual in African architecture, and that is something you need to know, and it's a pretty broad hint. Okay, what earlier work has a similar content, that is, a procession of women bringing a gift of cloth? It's actually kind of a fun comparison, and I'll bet that's one reason why the College Board included this image, a decision that has puzzled many of us art history teachers. What is tapa, and how is it made? What is this prehistoric Pacific work? Which of the works from this unit also use animal motifs? What is the content of the statue? What is it portraying? What peoples or culture produced this statue? There's an accept question that requires you to remember some details about this work. How is the king portrayed? What symbols of his rule are included? What's happening in the photo on the right, the contextual photo? What's the point of all that regalia? How does this Chokwe mask demonstrate the matriarchal, that is, female-dominated nature of this culture? Who gets to wear the masks? Good luck.